Hey, welcome to Bell Pre-Naz Online. So thankful that you can join us again. I hope that you're having a wonderful week. Hey, if you're following us on Facebook, that's how you're seeing this video right now. We'd love for you to go and share some of our posts and comment and like and make sure you follow us. It's just going to help us reach more people on social media. And that is an area of ministry that we are trying to grow right now. We're trying to use social media as a way to connect with more of our community and a new generation of people. So if you could help us out, we'd really appreciate that. Like, share, comment, follow, do all the things that the young people tell you to do at the end of the videos that still kind of confuses me. I hope you have a wonderful week. I hope you'll stay and listen to the sermon and be challenged by that and learn how can you best lean into the gifts and abilities and treasures that God has given you. Our duty is not to be perfect, but our duty is to be faithful and to serve with faithfulness. Have a wonderful week, and we'll see you next time.
I'm excited about this sermon series. As I introduced it last week, we're talking about living a generous life. And last week what we discussed is from the parable of from the teaching in the moment of Jesus and the widow's mite, where he talks about how it was all about her heart in giving. It had nothing to do with the size of the gift, but it was the heart behind it, because the people that were coming in and making a spectacle of throwing their tithes into the box and making a loud clang were doing it out of the excess in their life. They were doing that all off the profit, the interest of the money they had in the bank. Whereas this woman took the money that she had to eat off of, and that's what she gave to the church out of her own free will. And that's what God is looking for. People that are willing to give from the essence of their life, not just the excess of our life. Today we're going to be talking about being trusted with valuable things. And we're going to get into a parable teaching from Jesus, but I'll ask first, who here has been left responsible for someone else's things, whether you were house sitting or pet sitting or someone left you in charge of something very valuable? Has anyone ever had that experience? Sure, I never have. People don't trust me for some reason, but no. It's an important duty, isn't it, to take care of someone else's stuff. I personally, as I've typically worked with kids and teens, I took it very personally that those were like my kids and my teens, and I felt a great responsibility for being the one that these parents chose to try and speak into these kids at a very important time in their life. So that's something I always carried a great amount of responsibility for. And now as a senior pastor, I carry that same responsibility for all of you in this church, that I feel personally responsible for your hearts, for your souls, and I want to help guide you in the right path. Maybe you're like a kid in a movie who got left at home, accidentally put in responsibility of his entire house. And this little kid, he thought at first it was awesome. He saw the freedom that it came with, and he said, I'm going to have a blast. But we all know, as the movie goes on, little Kevin McAllister had to go from freedom to protecting his home, right? He had to keep his home safe from these terrible robbers that were trying to come and break into his house. Even though it was accidental, he kind of got left in responsibility of that beautiful home. I mean, it is a gigantic home with a bajillion bedrooms according to the movie layout, but it was a beautiful home, and he saw it as freedom, but when it came to reality, he realized that there was a responsibility that came with that freedom. And we understand our faith in Christ as a sense of freedom, but there is a responsibility that comes with that freedom. When we're entrusted with something special, like the gospel of Christ, there's an expectation for us to take care of it and to properly handle that important thing. It's not just given to us with the hopes that we're going to ignore it or that we're going to waste an opportunity. There's an expectation that we're going to do the right thing by whatever it is that we're entrusted with. And so Jesus tells this parable in Matthew chapter 25, verses 14 through 30. He tells a parable about a master who entrusts his servants with great wealth. And through this story, Jesus teaches us about stewardship and how we are to use what God has given us for his glory. I want to read that parable for us as we get started. Matthew chapter 25, verses 14 through 30. And it reads, again, it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted his wealth to them. To one he gave 5 bags of gold, or 5 talents, to another 2 bags, and to another 1 bag, each according to his ability. Then he went on his journey. The man who had received the 5 bags of gold went at once and put his money to work and gained 5 bags more. So also the one with 2 bags of gold gained 2 more. But the man who had received 1 bag went off, he dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of those servants returned, and he settled accounts with them. The man who had received 5 bags of gold brought the other 5. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 5 bags of gold. See, I have gained 5 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. The man with 2 bags of gold also came. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 2 bags of gold. See, I have gained 2 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many. Come and share your master's happiness. Then the man who had received 1 bag of gold came. Master, he said, I knew that you were a hard man, harvesting where you have not sown and gathering where you have not scattered seed. So I was afraid and went out and hid your gold in the ground. See, here is what belongs to you. His master replied, you wicked and lazy servant. So you knew that I harvest where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed. Well, then you should have put my money on deposit with the bankers, so that when I returned, I would have received it back with interest. So take the bag of gold from him and give it to the one who has 10 bags. For whoever has will be given more, and they will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what they have, will be taken from them. And throw that worthless servant outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. That ends aggressively, doesn't it? Kind of starts out simple, but by the end it gets a little overwhelming, a little intimidating. So I want to take this morning to break down this parable and to truly begin to understand what it is that Jesus is trying to teach us about being stewards of what we have been given. See, in this parable, Jesus is describing a master who is preparing to leave for some significant amount of time. But before he goes, he gives his wealth to his servants, giving each of them a portion based on their ability. That's an important fact, based on their ability. One servant receives 5 bags or 5 talents, another receives 2, and the last one receives a single talent or a single bag of gold. Now, at first glance, it might seem that the amounts given aren't equal, right? 1 5, 1 2, one of them gets 1. So why does the servant get 5 while the other one just gets 1? I think it's important to understand here that the master is only going to give according to what the servant's abilities are. He knows you, he knows me, he knows us so intimately. He understands what we are capable of handling. He doesn't want to set us up for failure, but he wants to give us responsibility that matches the capacity in our lives. It teaches us something important about God. He knows us personally. He knows us intimately and understands our strengths, our weaknesses, our capacity, and our potential. He doesn't give us more than we can handle in responsibility, but he doesn't withhold from us what we need to grow. So he understands your capacity and kind of puts the pressure on you that would be required to help you grow. Everything that we have, our time, our abilities, our opportunities, our finances, all of these things have been entrusted to us by him. But we have to understand something else, that the master entrusts them with his possessions. So the wealth doesn't belong to the servants now. It still belongs to the master, even though he has given it to the care of the servants. They're still not the owners, but they're the stewards. And the same is true for us. Everything we have ultimately belongs to God. He has given it to us, not to hoard it in a field, not to waste it in the shops, but to use it wisely for his purpose. See, this word talent, which is the original word in the text. I read a different version that used the term bag of gold just to make it more understandable. But talent was a significant sum of money. It was a lot of worth. In this parable, it represents more than just money, though. It's symbolizing all the valuables that God gives us. Our gifts, our skills, our opportunities, and our resources. Some of us have been given abilities in leadership or teaching or creativity. Others have been given resources to bless and use to bless others. No one has been left completely empty-handed. That's what we have to understand from this parable. We've all received some measure from the master. In 1 Corinthians 4:2, it says, "It will be required that those who have been given a trust must prove faithful." Faithfulness is the key. God isn't concerned about how much we've been given, but rather what we do with what we've been given. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, what has God entrusted to me, and am I being faithful with what has been entrusted to me? If God has given you awesome talents, are you using them for His glory? If God has blessed you with physical or financial resources, are you using those to advance His kingdom? If He's given you influence, if He's given you power and leadership, are you using it to point people to Him? Or are you seeking your own ends? Are you seeking your own benefit with your talents and your resources and your influence? We're all stewards of what God has given us. The real test is of our faithfulness, is not of what we have, but what we do with what we have. And that's where we get into the second part of this parable. The next part is the story with the different reactions between the servants and their response to this responsibility. It said the man who had received 5 talents went at once and put his money to work and gained 5 more. So also the one with 2 gained 2 more. But the man who had received 1 went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money. See, those first 2 servants, they didn't even hesitate. It says that at once they put their talents, they put this money to work. They recognized that what they had been given wasn't just to be stored away and protected, but it was to be used and invested. They invested it, and their efforts led to multiplication. They doubled what they had received, proving themselves faithful stewards of their master's resources. But the third servant, he did the opposite. Instead of taking action, he dug a hole in the ground, he buried this talent, and he did nothing with what he had been given. It wasn't technically lost, it wasn't stolen, it wasn't squandered recklessly, but it was hidden away, unused, and unfruitful. And that's the problem. The servant wasn't condemned because he tried and failed. He was condemned because he didn't try at all. He took the easy route out. He took the way of hiding rather than trying. Fear is the root of inaction. Why did he just bury that talent? I think later in the passage we begin to understand his reasoning. He was scared. He says, I was afraid and went out and hid your talent in the ground. He was afraid of what his master would do if he tried and failed in investing it. Fear is one of the greatest barriers to faithful stewardship in the church. Many people fail to use their God-given gifts and talents, not because they don't have them, but because they're too afraid to step out in faith. Some fear failure in those circumstances. What if I mess up? What if I don't do it right? What if I sing off key? What if I drop the offering plate? What if I hit the wrong arrow on the slides? What if I do something wrong? Others are going to fear comparison. I don't have as much to offer as someone else does. That other person's check is a little bigger every week. That other person is able to do way more building maintenance than I'm capable of doing. Along the same line, some people fear inadequacy. They say, am I really capable? Maybe someone else is better suited for this. Maybe someone else would make a better teacher for our children. Maybe someone else would do a better job at praying in front of the congregation. Maybe someone else. Fill in the blank. But here's the truth. Fear always leads to burying. Faith always leads to building. Fear causes people to sit on their gifts, to keep their talents locked away, to stay silent when they should speak, and to remain passive when they should be active. But God has not called us to live in fear. In fact, in 2 Timothy 1:7, he says, "For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and sound mind." God has entrusted each of us with gifts, not so that we can hide them, but so that we can use them. I want you to imagine with me a sports team where some of the players never leave the bench. They come to every practice, Sunday morning. They put on the uniform, the right attire. They learn the plays. They learn the amens. They learn the hymns. They learn the words. But when game time comes, they sit on the sideline. They're completely unwilling to go out and take the field in fear that they may mess up, in fear that they're not the best, in fear that something might go wrong. No matter how much talent they may have, if they never play, it does not make a difference. They might say, "I don't want to mess up," or "I'm not as good as the other players," but their inaction costs the team. God calls us to get in the game, to take what he has given us and put it to work for his kingdom, not to sit on the bench, not to try and win that Super Bowl ring by being the 70th guy on the roster, but by being the captain of the team, by trying to lead that team with your influence, or maybe not even the captain, but a leader by character and personality. We have to get in the game. We have to invest what God has given us. Are we investing or are we burying? Are we taking what God has given us and investing it into the world, or are we holding back because of fear and anxiety? Here's the reality. If God has given you a voice, are you using it to share his truth? Are you speaking out for those that are marginalized and taken advantage of? Are you speaking out against the terrors of this world? Are you speaking out in hope and love and compassion? If God's blessed you with resources, are you using them to bless others? Are you using them to invest in the kingdom? Or are you setting them back and hiding them in a hole for yourself? Or are you taking those resources and going out and getting things that bring temporary joy to your life? If God's given you opportunities, if he's given you position or leadership or just influence in different parts of the community, are you stepping into those places, or are you hesitating? Are you holding back out of fear in those places? See, the first two servants, they acted in faith, but the third one acted in fear. Only two of them were rewarded at the end. So which of the servants are we going to be? Are we going to be the ones who go and do without hesitation? Or are we going to be the ones that go and bury and dig a hole in a field to hide away? At the end of the day, this is a call to faithful stewardship. Stewardship is a word that has been used in the church for generations to define leaders in the church that are responsible for the care of the building and the finances and all these different areas. But stewardship is not a call for a select few. It's a call for the entire body of Christ. To maintain the church and its building, yes, that's definitely important. But to be maintaining the spirit of your life, of your heart, of your community. Stewardship is one of the core fundamentals to being a follower of Christ. So are we using what God has given us for his glory? Every one of us has been entrusted with something. It's time, it's ability, it's resources, it's relationships, it's opportunities. The issue is not whether we have been given something valuable, but rather what we are doing with what we have been given. Just like the servants in the parable, we have a choice. Will we faithfully invest what God has entrusted to us, or will we allow fear and doubt or complacency to keep us from taking action and investing in the world? For some, I think that this is going to involve stepping out in faith to serve in a new way. Perhaps it's going to be leading a Bible study, volunteering somewhere in the church, mentoring someone in their walk with Christ, being a disciple-making disciple. It's going to take something new for many of us. For others, it might mean giving more generously. Maybe God has trusted you with a lot of finances and recognizes that you are capable of taking care of those things, but is asking for you to invest them in the kingdom, recognizing that all you have already belongs to him, and he's looking for faithful stewards that will step out and reinvest what he's already given. For some, it might mean finally sharing the gospel with a friend or a coworker or a family member, being bold in your witness and not letting the fear keep you silent, stepping out in faith and saying, I know that Jesus loves you, and Jesus wants to have a relationship with you. I think a lot of times we just don't say the thing, and then we get frustrated saying, why don't people come to Christ? Sometimes we just need to share our story. We need to share the gospel. For others, I think that it might mean dusting off a talent or ability that you've been neglecting. Something that God has clearly given you, but you've buried it because of fear, insecurity, distraction, or exhaustion. I've done it for 25 years. I'm tired. I get that. But sometimes God is calling us to dust those things off and to step back into the identity that he has built for us. But whatever it is, God is calling you to be faithful with what he has entrusted to you. So you have to step out and you have to be willing to take those chances, to not bury it in the field, but to step in faith and invest those talents in the world. I'm going to leave you with these three challenges, if you will. The first one is to identify your God-given gifts. Take time and reflect on what God has placed in your hands. What skills, what resources, or what opportunities has God given to you? What burdens or passions has he placed on your heart? See, sometimes we overlook what we have because we assume that it's just too small or insignificant. But in God's hands, even the smallest offering can make an eternal impact. I'll share a short story on that. Someone in this church had a burden for homeless people, especially when it was super cold outside. And that person was a little hesitant to come to me and speak to me because they said, I can't do it myself, but this is a way that we could help serve our community. And I took that and I ran with it a little bit. I said, thank you so much for providing the vision, providing the direction. Sometimes you don't have the resources to do yourself, but you have the passion to go and help. And so now we've collected food, we've collected coats and socks and all that. I'm not saying we've impacted every person in Parkersburg that's homeless, but I guarantee we've impacted several lives in Parkersburg. It just takes one person with an idea to launch something beautiful in the church. And guess what? It can't always come from your pastor. I'm a creative guy. But sometimes I need the help of the church to give me your ideas, to share with me where your abilities are so that I can know how to help resource you and to encourage you to go and do the work of the church as well. The next challenge I want to give you is to step out in faith and use those things that God has given you. Don't let your fear keep you from being obedient. Maybe you've been waiting for the perfect moment to serve or to give or to take action, but I want you to understand the reality is the perfect moment will never come. If you're saying, I just need to wait until life slows down, guess what? It just gets busier. If you're trying to wait and say, I'm just waiting for this thing to happen and I'll do it, well, guess what? As soon as that thing happens, something else will come up. There is no perfect moment. The first two servants in the parable immediately went to work with what they were given. They didn't hesitate. I like to think they didn't even plan. They just walked out and started doing stuff. But they immediately took action. They didn't overthink it. They simply stepped out in faith. So what is holding you back from doing the same thing? Freezing will lead us to fear. We have to step out in that faith. The third thing I want to challenge you with is that you would just trust God that he will bless your faithful stewardship. A phrase that I like to use a lot is that he's going to bless our effort. So as we step into things And we may be a little overwhelmed. We may be a little bit terrified at the prospect of stepping into a new project or a new service, a new ministry. A lot of times I'll just use the phrase, he's going to bless our effort. If we step in that direction, he's going to begin to flood the resources and the people in around us. That's been my practice at this church, in fact. I've said, you know what? God's going to bless the effort, and we're going to step into something. And always, people have flooded in around that thing, and they've made it work. We could use more people to serve in a lot of areas, but God will bless that effort. He's just looking for perfection. I'm sorry. He's just looking for faithfulness, not perfection. Don't hear what I said the first time. He's looking for faithfulness, not perfection. When we begin to trust him and we invest what he has given us, he is the one who brings the increase. He's the one who multiplies our efforts and turns our obedience into something far greater than we could ever imagine. At the end of our lives, we all long to hear the words spoken to the faithful servants in the parable. Well done, good and faithful servant. But those words didn't come from playing it safe. Those words didn't come from the servant who buried what he had received in the field. It came to those who had stepped out in faith. It didn't come from the burying of gifts. It came from using what God had given them, from trusting him and living a life of faithful stewardship. So today, you should try and take time, or this week, take some time to identify your gifts, to find the courage to step out in faith, not waiting for the perfect moment, but saying it's going to be now, and trust God with the results. And understand that God will bless your efforts. I'll share one more little story about our community right now. Several weeks ago, we had Angie come from LifeWise Academy. She came and spoke in the service and shared the vision of what we were working toward in our community. And we've got amazing things happening, and we've got some struggles coming up. We've got some opposition that's fighting us. But on the other hand, we have 18 kids signed up to come and hear the gospel during the school day, off school grounds, the way it's legally allowed to be done. And what a beautiful opportunity that is, but we're stepping out in faith because as board members, we've spent over $4,000 to make this happen. So that means we're $4,000 in the hole, and we're sitting here thinking, where's this money going to come from, right? But we're trying to step out in faith and say, God's going to bless this effort. He's going to find a way to meet those needs, and I don't think it's going to come from one person. I think it's going to come from an army of people giving the little bit that they can. But we have to step out in faith when we see that what God is calling us to is good and centered in his kingdom work. We have to be willing to step out into those things. If you're looking for ways to serve in the church, there's a lot. We need people to help us clean the building. We have a sign-up sheet in the lobby right now if you're willing to do that. We need people to help teach our kids. We would love to have more teachers, and we'd love to have our nursery open. We're having a lot of babies in church. Isn't that a beautiful thing? So why don't we try to find a way to give those babies a place to go and experience love and hear the fundamental Bible stories that's going to help grow them into this beautiful faith? Maybe you're a singer and you don't want to tell me because you're scared. I understand. I'm not a singer. But I'll tell you, I love standing up here and leading in worship sometimes. It's also exhausting, if I'm being honest. But I'd love to hear if you have gifts and abilities. If you want to sit in the back and hide like Shane, he gets to just hide away. You may not even know he's here today. All he has to do is click the mouse and hit a button on the keyboard. There's so many simple ways to serve. There's a lot of other things that we could do. We could provide more Bible studies during the week. We could provide more opportunities for discipleship through the week. There are so many things that we could do. But what we're waiting on is the people that are willing to stand up and say, I'm ready to step into the gifts and the abilities that God has already given me in my life. And this is how I want to serve. And maybe this is how I want to serve, is you just saying, how can I serve? Maybe you don't even know what to do. You just know God is saying, I need to do something. There's a lot of places in our community, that you could go and serve. There are organizations that are out there serving the community. There are government organizations that make plans and dream up ideas for our community. How cool would it be to have a bunch of Christians sitting on those boards and dreaming up with the eyes of Jesus, not just with the eyes of the world, what could happen in this community? There are so many places that you could get involved. There are places to invest your resources. You may not have the time or the talent to invest in it personally, but maybe you have the resources and you're like, I've got a bunch of money. Where can I go? I'll spend it for you, I promise. Maybe it's not a huge sum either. It might just be the little bit that you have, but you know God's calling you to do something with it. Let's figure out what God's calling you to give it to. Take time to identify your gifts, your abilities, your resources that God has given to you. Find a way to step out in faith. Find a person to talk to about it. Once you speak it, it's real. And then things start happening. And then we have to trust God with the results. We have to have faith that God is going to take the effort that we put in and He's going to bless it. And He's going to do amazing and beautiful things. I think if we become a church that steps out in faith, you'd be amazed what could happen in this community through Belfry Church of the Nazarene. It could be a really beautiful thing. But God is looking for faithful people to step out.